Tonight we have a special on the beat, Bob Mueller's next move, a look at where the most consequential criminal investigation in America is headed in its second year. We have some special bookings and insiders joining me to explain what the current indictments suggest about where this probe is headed, how Mueller deploys the secretive grand jury process to collect evidence, and new clues that federal investigators are moving beyond somewhat obscure figures like Carter Page and George Papadopoulos to scrutinize Trump insiders like Michael Cohen and Roger Stone, who've been keeping Trump's counsel for over a decade. So we have a lot planned tonight, but we begin with the face-off that may define Donald Trump's presidency. It's not Trump versus Nancy Pelosi or even Trump versus the resistance. It's Trump versus Mueller. And while Trump has now deployed Rudy Giuliani to take a tougher tack with Mueller, it is revealing that Donald Trump did not start on offense. When this probe began, Trump was careful to avoid criticizing Mueller directly.
I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous, if you want to know the truth from that standpoint. But Robert Mueller's an honorable man, and hopefully he'll come up with an honorable solution. An
honorable man. And that actually lasted for the majority of the life of this probe. Consider, in the first 10 months, Trump not only avoided tweeting attacks on Mueller, he avoided tweeting anything mentioning his name at all. Now, Trump did attack and undermine the FBI in many ways during that time. We've reported on that. But there was at least initially something about Mueller or Mueller's power holding Trump back. But now, just recently, as Mueller works his way up this food chain, securing those 5 guilty pleas, securing indictments of a dozen others, and exposing new and additional public links between Donald Trump and Russia and Russian-backed entities, and putting more Trump aides in the witness chair, all of that has resulted in a clear shift in Donald Trump's strategy as he ousted a cooperative lawyer in exchange for Giuliani.
Is it, from your vantage point right now, Ty Cobb, a virtual certainty that the president will have some Q&A with the special counsel, Robert Mueller?
That's my belief. And the president is very eager to sit down and explain whatever is responsive to the question.
It's totally garbage investigation. Sorry, Jim, you're a liar, a disgraceful liar. Mueller owes us a report saying the Russian collusion means nothing. It didn't happen. That means the whole investigation was totally unnecessary.
I'm joined now by federal prosecutor Daniel Goldman and Maya Wiley, an attorney and former counsel to the mayor of New York City. Maya, this is a big change, and it's easy to miss because Donald Trump talks so much trash. But what do you interpret as this shift from 10 months of relative quiescence into now the Rudy strategy?
What we're seeing is that the flame is being turned up on the kettle, and the kettle is starting to make a lot of noise. Because at the same time that Trump was trying to keep it fairly contained, fairly low, it was because an attack those who seemed weaker. It was because he felt probably less vulnerable than he does right now. If you have your confidant, your attorney, I'm not sure that's actually the right word to use in some of the transactions that Michael Cohen engaged in, but someone who has reason to have perhaps a lot of documents, emails, possibly taped phone conversations with you, and we have some reason to believe has had actual connections to Russians and during the campaign, and has engaged in some conduct that looks, frankly, not quite legal, that there's lots of reasons for Trump to be on the defensive and trying to get back on the offensive. And I think it's particularly important that what he's really doing is using Giuliani to do a kind of a spin on the facts, not even clear that they're always facts, and Mueller can't respond.
But you're saying you view this as a lot about Michael Cohen.
I view it as a lot about a lot of things. I mean, remember, there are 19 indictments already in this investigation. I think Cohen is what puts it completely over the edge. I think that's why we're seeing the House Intelligence Committee respond the way it's responding right now to this notion of this informant for the FBI that somehow did something inappropriate during the campaign, which there's actually really no indication that anything inappropriate happened there. But I think what we're seeing is a lot that is driving up the heat, and the pot is boiling. When you use that boiling metaphor, Daniel, and you think about the choices that Michael Cohen made, there is a saying in some musical circles, I'm not interested if it doesn't involve any commas.
commas being a reference to how much money is involved. Michael Cohen seems to have put out a shingle and been for sale. But that's not necessarily terrible for Trump if that was all personal greed, right? Why would that make Donald Trump nervous unless there's more to it?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. And I think that, to use the analogy, the flame has been turned up pretty much right when Michael Cohen's office, home, and hotel were searched by the FBI, and when Trump realized this is now not just with Mueller's office, this has gone to the Southern District of New York. So he's getting it from multiple flanks. And I think, that made him a lot more nervous, because my suspicion is Donald Trump feels like, I never spoke to any Russians, therefore I didn't collude, I don't have any exposure to that. That's not legally correct, but I think that's what a lot of people, lay people, generally think. And he probably feels relatively comfortable on that, and has been reassured that on the obstruction angle, he's unlikely to get charged for a variety of reasons, or at least feels like it's not so cut and dried. So he felt like he was personally okay. Then when the Michael Cohen thing happens, now all of a sudden, this is expanding way past the campaign, way past what his obstructive behavior has been during the presidency, and now it's into some of his personal finances. And so that's when the pivot really occurred, and now he's attacking the entire investigation. And I think he's essentially just saying, I am going to cut the legs out of the credibility of this investigation. That's my defense. I'm not going to have a legal defense. I'm going to have a political defense.
And that goes to reaching for Rudy Giuliani. You've been in these New York circles, which is a bit of a theme for us tonight. And Trump and Rudy go back a ways. Indeed, we're going to show something very odd, which is Rudy Giuliani wearing a dress. In a skit that was part of a parody thing they were doing in 2000 between the two of them. Take a look.
Maybe you could tell me what you think of this set.
I like that.
This may be the best of all. Oh, you dirty boy, you. Oh. Donald, I thought you were a gentleman.
You can't say I didn't try.
First of all, I'm sorry to everyone that we played that. But it does actually illustrate something, which is these are two people who were performers in a town, New York City, known for performance, and they performed their way up the echelon, right? I mean, Rudy Giuliani now has a lot of people in America thinking of him as this very serious legal voice, when in fact, he doesn't have a lot of experience doing criminal defense law, which is something we pointed out on the show, and it's not clear that he has a strategy for Mueller other than a TV strategy. He
has a communication strategy. First of all, that clip in a Me Too era is just disgusting to watch. I just have to say that out loud.
Say it.
And it also demonstrates that something that we know about Giuliani, which is he is actually very interested in being a public persona. And so for him, it's the perfect role. He gets to be on TV. He gets to be on TV constantly. He gets to drive news. And he's not playing a legal game, as we know. What he's really playing is a communications game. And he has the ability to say, Mueller told me X. And that X might not be true. And yet Mueller then can't necessarily come back and say, I didn't say that. So that is actually the one.
You're right. I mean, most of the time when we call the special counsel's office, we have no comment. We say, well, do you want to say whether that's off base or not? Do you want to give a hint on background? No, they generally don't want to say anything.
But they are talking to Rudy Giuliani.
Yes.
And the fact that Giuliani is out there spouting factual inaccuracies cannot be helpful to any negotiations that he is trying to do with Mueller in terms of an interview and narrowing the topics or the subpoena. This as a former prosecutor, when someone is out there going public and misrepresenting what I'm saying, I just would stop negotiating with them. That's sort of, you're not.
You think it ices out the whole thing?
I think it makes it a lot more difficult for Giuliani to get what he wants if he is telling the media inaccurate statements about what Mueller has said.
Right. Let me fit in a break, but both of you stay as part of our special. So give me 1 sec. Coming up, the indictments and the guilty pleas, what Mueller's targeted so far. Tell us about where the probe is headed, and we'll take you inside the special counsel's office. What witnesses actually say goes on in that secretive grand jury process. And later, Later, the Michael Cohen factor, the surprise twist that could lead to new fronts in the Russia probe, all ahead on this special edition of The Beat on MSNBC. Now we turn to the most tangible result of Bob Mueller's first year of work, the indictments, and what they suggest about the future of this probe and how they may be rattling Donald Trump himself. You know, it's easy to forget the first indictment came fast, just 5 months into this probe.
The first indictment in the investigation into alleged ties between the Trump campaign and Russia.
The president's former campaign chief, Paul Manafort, has already surrendered himself to the FBI, and his former deputy, Rick Gates, has been told to turn himself in.
This is it. These are the indictments. They did work for Ukraine and were paid by the Ukrainian government, but that they hid these payments from U.S. authorities.
That was a big deal, but Trump initially claimed the reports left him feeling vindicated because the indictments, the first ones, focused on activity before 2016. Trump tweeted at 10:25 a.m. that day, "This is years ago, before Manafort was part of the Trump campaign," and adding a few minutes later, "There's no collusion." Well, Donald Trump's tweets aged poorly. As the old saying goes, tweet first, ask questions last. That's how most of these so-called gangsters pass, because minutes later, news broke Mueller secured his first guilty plea, and it was campaign related.
A former Trump campaign advisor, George Papadopoulos, has pleaded guilty in a separate case to giving false statements to the FBI.
It's 10:35 a.m. here on Monday, and we are reporting the first Russia-related charge in Bob Mueller's investigation. That was a big deal by any measure, and the onslaught of indictments continued in the following months.
Mueller has filed charges against 13 defendants who are Russians. They are charged, these defendants, with defrauding the United States of America.
These new charges in the special counsel's Russia investigation against a guy named Alex van der Zwaan.
Russian-linked attorney Alex van der Zwaan departing a district courthouse moments ago after pleading guilty for lying to the FBI.
And that's not all. If you count it all up, you've got 4 indictments of former Trump aides or advisors, a California, London-based attorney, 13 Russian nationals, as well as 3 Russian companies, and then you have key members of Trump's team who are, of course, cooperating. Now, some critics say, enough, Mueller should wrap it up after about a year here, and they question what he's achieved, which is fair game to debate. But as a historical factual matter, Bob Mueller is actually more productive than most people on this kind of assignment in history. During the Bush era, there was a special counsel appointed to probe an illegal leak, which led to 1 indictment, Scooter Libby. Trump pardoned him this year. Everyone remembers Counsel Kenneth Starr, who investigated Clinton. That case also only led directly to 1 federal indictment. Iran-Contra was 14 people. That's quite a bit more. But the first year alone of Mueller's Russia probe has 19 indictments. That includes, of course, the 13 Russians charged directly with interfering in U.S. democracy. Maya Wiley is back with me, and I want to bring in Guy Lewis to this conversation, a former federal prosecutor who's worked with Bob Mueller, James Comey, and Rod Rosenstein at the DOJ. Guy, put this in context for us. A good investigator does not, of course, evaluate based on a total number of indictments, because their job is to find the facts, and if the facts aren't bad, maybe no one should be indicted. Having said that, what does this historical frame tell you about the critics who say that Bob Mueller is not getting anything done?
I think it disproves them beyond any doubt whatsoever. Remember, Ari, Bob Mueller didn't ask for this job. Just like serving as a Marine and serving in Vietnam, he was called upon. He has agreed to serve, and I think he's done a terrific job. And you and Dan and Maya, who have given, I think, terrific analysis, hit the nail on the head. Bob has indicted 22 people and various companies. He's obtained, I think, 5 guilty pleas so far, 1 individual sentenced. And maybe even more importantly, Ari, how many leaks have we heard? How many press conferences have we seen? 0. And I got to tell you, for someone in this kind of case, with this kind of scrutiny, I got to give Bob Mueller a lot of credit for what he's doing so far.
Maya, what does it tell you that the president is obsessed with this on a personal basis? So he talks about the personal witch hunt. But you can't factually dismiss what we just laid out, that there are people who got caught and pled guilty, so there's no debate left, and the system is supposed to work that way.
Yeah, and I think Mr. Lewis is exactly right about Bob Mueller, who has been nothing but an extremely competent public servant who has simply put his head down and gone about his job. What is going on with Donald Trump, which I think we should all be concerned about, is we have not seen what a credible politician would normally do under these circumstances in which people close to him or people who have been in his campaign or in his inner circle are indicted, which is to immediately say that they do not condone the conduct, that they are disturbed, they would praise an investigator that actually had identified potential violations of law. They wouldn't necessarily throw them completely under the bus,
well,
but they would certainly express concern.
How about this? Go down memory lane. I'm old enough to remember when we had like a national conversation about how candidate Barack Obama had to disown his pastor.
That's right.
For things that were regrettable, that a lot of people disagree with, but this was a pastor who said words in a public setting. And there was it was an endless thing about how fully you have to disown. In Donald Trump's case, I mean, you're saying something that I think gets forgotten. Campaign chair indicted. Deputy campaign chair pled guilty, cooperating. National security advisor pled guilty, cooperating. Foreign policy advisor pled guilty, cooperating. At what point is there an obligation for the Republican Party and everyone else in the country to say, you need to condemn all of that?
Yes.
Innocent until proven guilty, sure, but some of these people are guilty.
You are the highest political official in the land of the United States, and you're sworn to uphold the Constitution and the laws of this country. It is simply nothing short of despicable that you've not spoken out and said, while I don't necessarily believe any of these charges may come to actual convictions, which you could say if you want to, but I think it's incredibly important that the American people understand what happened and that there's a full and fair trial and that we must hear and understand what has happened.
Guy?
Well, I think Maya is exactly right in terms of this is extraordinary. But I think they'll both, Dan and Maya will tell you, as we went through as assistant U.S. attorneys and prosecuted case after case, this wasn't unusual that either the agents or the agency would get attacked and vilified, or even the prosecutors when we would try cases, big and small. Not unusual that the other side would use that tactic. 99% of the time it didn't work, but the other side didn't have sort of a national platform, a bully pulpit that they could be tweeting at 3 and 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning, and it would be on national news all day. So that's the big difference here.
Yeah, and that raises a couple other points I want to actually ask you both about. So Guy and Maya, if you're willing, please stay with me. Up next, we're going to take you somewhere that very few people get to go to. That's what witnesses say happens inside Mueller's interrogation room, including some people we've been lucky enough to have on our show directly after their testimony. That's when The Beat returns in 60 seconds.
It's me, Robert Mueller. All right. I want to tell you so bad. I can't. I'm not going to, but yeah. It's going to be fun. Yeah.
Bob Mueller, he hasn't spoken in public since this Russia probe launched a year ago, but SNL has deployed more than one actor to imagine what Mueller might be like and whether he will ever answer this big question about collusion. Now, witnesses say the real Mueller is a Sphinx-like presence who sits quietly along the wall as his investigators grill people. And most of those people don't talk a lot about their experience. A few have spoken out, the most infamous being former Trump aide Sam Nunberg, who claimed he'd defy Mueller before cooperating, as well as the wife of George Papadopoulos, who's also told us about what went on.
This grand jury is taking this very, very seriously. To the extent that I was able to look at them, mostly because I was facing the person who was questioning me, to the extent I was able to look at them, they were taking notes, they were focused, they were interested.
Were the investigators professional or were they aggressive? How was it for you?
The situation was clearly intimidating, but they were very professional, very fair. I never felt aggressed in any way.
Professional and thorough. Another Trump aide who faced these investigators, Michael Caputo, is saying something that could intimidate anyone who wants to hide from Mueller, explaining that Mueller will know more than you do.
The Mueller team knew more about what I did in 2016 than I knew myself And I think they know more about the Trump campaign than anyone that ever worked there. They're clearly focused on trying to identify some Russian collusion.
I'm joined by David Priest, a former CIA officer who used to give Bob Mueller his morning intelligence briefing daily. And also Wall Street Journal's Shelby Holliday, who's been reporting on the Mueller probe, is back with us. David, speak to the point that Michael says, which is both true but counterintuitive. How could someone else know more about something than what you lived through? But the whole point of intelligence, whether you gather it the way you did at CIA or the way investigators do in a criminal probe, is to gather the knowledge of way more than one person.
Yeah, it makes sense because our memories are infallible, but facts remain. And Bob Mueller has access in this investigation to a range of things. He has facts coming from other witnesses. He has facts coming from foreign intelligence. He has facts coming from bank records and transactions coming through the Treasury Department's office called FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. He's got no shortage of information. His job is to process it. His job is to put all that together and say, what is the picture here and what pieces are we missing that we need to ask others about, or what pieces do we think are here that we can see if people are telling the truth.
Right, and that goes to, let me build on that and play something for you. That goes to the sort of the old school part of Mueller as almost a character or a fact finder that I think has taken root in the public imagination. We showed the SNL clips because in this moment right now, there is, I think, a fascination with people who work only with facts. I want to play his maybe long forgotten testimony about a very dramatic time when there was that hospital confrontation in the Bush administration. James Comey was involved, Alberto Gonzales was involved, Ashcroft was involved. And when asked about it, he stuck to the most spare factual rendering he could under oath, Bob Mueller, and didn't want to get into anything beyond the facts. Take a look.
Were you surprised when you received the phone call from Mr. Comey indicating that there was going to be this visit to Mr. Ashcroft by Gonzales and Cart?
It was out of the ordinary.
Tell me why you decided to make notes of your conversation with Mr. Ashcroft.
It was out of the ordinary.
Out of the ordinary. How does that square with the man you worked with and that style?
That matches up very closely. In fact, he's not somebody who liked to show his cards. He played things close to his vest. But in my case, I was the one there to answer his questions about foreign intelligence so that he could put this puzzle together. And in doing so, what I found was the same mannerism you saw there played out on the other side, which is when he's not receiving questions but asking them. It was always with a purpose. When he asked questions, when he dug down into details that I didn't think he'd be interested in, I later found out there was always a reason. Sometimes it didn't come until the end of the questioning, and I found out, aha, he knows something from his work at the Bureau or talking with other senior officials that I didn't know, but now I see why he did this. It was never a fishing expedition.
You thought he knew more than you. Do you think he was smarter than you?
I think he was much better at putting together information at the tactical and the strategic level at the same time than virtually anyone I worked with in my entire career at CIA and the State Department. I never saw somebody who could simultaneously be following each detail and then at the same time jump to the big picture question and back again so rapidly. It was fun to watch him work on that.
Shelby?
I can say that I've been speaking to some of the witnesses and possibly potential witnesses, and everybody has this fear of Mueller, not just because he is the Sphinx-like presence who maybe sits against the wall and listens, but because, for the exact same reasons we were just talking about, he knows everything, and he is very organized, he is very efficient. We hear that he just goes through questions, his team goes through questions with a purpose. No one is just kind of chatting or kicking the can.
They're not just chilling?
No, they have a mission.
You don't get the
and
they're just hanging out?
They're not hanging out.
Like
and
what's going to happen
they are aggressively
later today?
Pursuing collusion, as Michael Caputo said. It's not just about obstruction.
Take a look at something that began to get reported out on the beat as it happened, because we had Sam Nunberg on. Some people remember that. But long before Stormy Daniels became a criminal case in New York, we learned that Mueller was asking some of these questions. Did Mueller's folks ask anything that related to these issues around payments to people or women?
Well, look, they asked if I had ever heard anything about that, and my answer is I never have.
I've never heard you say that publicly before. In your FBI interview with Mueller's team, they were asking about payments to women?
They were asking if I knew anything about it.
And those, I mean, we have to say that we only know a few glimpses of what's happening in the Mueller investigation because of witnesses like Sam who are willing to speak up. A lot of witnesses aren't willing to tell us what they were asked. We don't even know who all the witnesses are. I think that's the biggest mystery of this investigation. Even members of Congress don't know what Mueller has, as they have been simultaneously probing possible Russia collusion. So it's just this giant mystery novel, and you never know what page it ends on.
Well, and that's why it's fascinating to talk to some of these witnesses who are able legally to talk. Most of them choose not to on the advice of counsel.
Right.
So the type who do come out may have their own reasons. As journalists, we can always speculate on why someone wants to do that.
Right.
But it's been very informative to hear, at least, as you say, some of those glimpses. Shelby, stay with me. I want to get into one other thing. David Priest, thank you for your personal view there, your experience with Mueller. Up ahead, the big questions. What is still secret, and when and how could it come out? Also, Donald Trump's longtime fixer, Michael Cohen. Well, why is he becoming Donald Trump's biggest headache?
So, how was work today?
Oh, you know, really bad. Mostly just preparing to go to jail and stuff. They said I might get 20 years unless I give you up.
I've heard jail's fun.
Fun?
Yeah, it's like camp. Plus, there's a free gym, dude. You're gonna get surjacked.
They even have programs in jail where you can get a real law degree. Ah!
SNL roasting Michael Cohen as a mediocre lawyer headed for jail. The self-proclaimed fixer now sits in the red-hot core of two of Trump's biggest legal problems, paying off Stormy Daniels and taking money from a firm linked to a sanctioned Russian oligarch. And for all the strange events in the first year of the Mueller probe, the news that the feds raided the president's lawyer was a true bombshell.
Late word of an FBI raid on the Manhattan offices of President Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. Agents also hit Cohen's hotel room, seizing records after getting a referral from the special counsel's office.
But what records? Many legal experts were noting at the time that those kind of tough tactics were unlikely to be deployed if the only issue were Stormy Daniels. And that was correct. Cohen is now implicated in many other issues, operating a slush fund to sell corporations access to his boss, allegedly seeking payments from foreign governments, the kind of pay-for-play that can break the law without the right registration, and which Donald Trump campaigned against.
It's called pay for play. Pay for play corruption. Pay for pay. More pay for play. It's pay for play, which is illegal, 100% illegal.
I'm joined now by Randall Eliason, a former federal prosecutor. He writes in the Washington Post, Michael Cohen is in serious legal jeopardy. The Reverend Al Sharpton, my colleague, president of the National Action Network, host of Politics Nation, and a player in his own right in New York politics in the land of Donald Trump and Michael Cohen. And Shelby Holliday back with us, of course, from the Wall Street Journal. Rev, starting with you as someone who knows how these people work and has been around Trump and Cohen in New York, this wasn't just any aid to Donald Trump.
No, he was his guy that would really fix things. I remember when Trump started getting very political on the Bertha issue, it was Cohen that set up the meeting with Trump and I, where Trump wanted me to stop calling him a racist and saying that the Bertha movement was race-based. And Cohen sat in the meeting. I mean, so Cohen did all kind of duties on behalf of Donald Trump.
What did you glean about him and the trust that Trump puts in him from those dealings?
I think that as much as Donald Trump is capable of trusting someone, it would have been Cohen. Now, that I don't think that he has a lot of trust in anybody.
Are you suggesting that Donald Trump has trust issues?
I suggest that very strongly. I think Donald Trump is for Donald Trump, which is why I think Cohen has some very serious thinking to do about what he is going to do now that he is facing serious time if any of the reports that we are reading about end up becoming true.
Shelby, you've been covering this story with us here on the beat since the inception. It wasn't clear exactly where the Stormy Daniels case would go.
Right.
But everyone can now remember those fateful words Donald Trump said on Air Force One. And knowing what we all now publicly know, it is remarkable in the form of a self-damaging dare. Take a look.
Did you know about the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels? Then why did Michael Cohen make it if there was no true allegations?
Well, you have to ask Michael Cohen. Michael's my attorney, and you'll have to ask Michael.
Do you know where
Ask Michael Cohen.
I think you bring up a really important point because Trump's public statements, we don't know what he's saying to Cohen privately, but his public statements have been very distanced from Michael Cohen. He's backing off of, his fix-it man, his right-hand man in a big way. He's saying these are Michael's business dealings. This was Michael's legal issue. You'll have to ask Michael Cohen. He also pointed out Michael Cohen is my attorney. He said that in April. So the fact that Michael Cohen was still considered the president's attorney, given all of the weird business dealings he was involved in, also raises some major ethical and legal questions for the president. But I do think one of the most fascinating things about this saga is to watch how the president has sort of publicly thrown Michael Cohen under the bus, and Michael in return, and through various people in the media, has warned the president, don't go there.
Well, under the bus, and then really put it in reverse and backed up over.
Oh, yeah. Multiple times.
Over
that
his
phone call to
bleeding
Fox
body.
and Friends was astonishing to people close to Michael Cohen.
Wild. Randall, I want to play for you something else that's come up in the first year of the probe, which is what is known in legal circles as bonkers interviews. We've had a few of them, including one with the man who preceded Michael Cohen as Donald Trump's chief lawyer, who didn't have great things to say about Cohen. Do you think Michael Cohen's job at times was to keep the mob away from Donald Trump?
Well, if he says he was a fixer, then the question is, what did he fix? And what needed fixing? What needed fixing was relations with the mob and shakedowns by the mob so that there be no strikes and there be labor peace at all costs.
Randall, that's not a critic of Donald Trump. That's Donald Trump's longtime lawyer who said, I'm going to repeat, what Michael Cohen was doing was dealing with what needed fixing, and what needed fixing was, quote, relations with the mob.
I think it's pretty clear that Michael Cohen was deeply involved in a lot of President Trump's activities, or even before he was president, of course, and we don't yet know what all is going to come out of this. The key thing, I think, to remember is that Robert Mueller is months ahead of the rest of us when it was revealed that, his investigators spoke, I think, last November to some of these corporations that were paying Michael Cohen these large retainers that we just learned about a few weeks ago. So there's clearly a lot going on that Michael Cohen has a lot to be nervous about, and I think we just have to wait and see what Mueller's investigation, the other investigations reveal about the depth and the nature of these ties. It's important to remember that there's a lot that goes on in this type of activity, such as the retainers from these corporations that might be sleazy and unethical in the Washington swamp, but not necessarily illegal. And so sorting all of that out is going to take some time.
Well, based on what we do know, what do you think was the most likely criminal evidence predicate for those dramatic searches then?
Again, it's hard to know, not being involved in the grand jury investigation, but it sounds like things related to possible money laundering, real estate deals in New York. Maybe campaign finance violations related to the Stormy Daniels payoff, but I doubt that would alone be the basis of this aggressive step.
Reverend Sharpton, Michael Avenatti emerged as well as first Michael Cohen's adversary, and lawyers fight all the time, but then is something of more of a tormentor. And it's Cohen now who's under serious federal probe, not Avenatti. We spoke to him when this all started to come out, and he felt it was predicting like a Christmas gift when Donald Trump put Cohen on blast. Take a look.
We waited patiently, and lo and behold, Christmas has arrived. The president's comments on Air Force One are serious for him, serious for Michael Cohen. How can you have an agreement when one party claims that they don't know anything about the agreement? I mean, these guys are making it up as they go along.
Rev, you've seen a lot of different things in New York politics. Could you ever have imagined that Michael Avenatti, a civil plaintiff's attorney representing this adult film actress, would turn out to be such a key to Michael Cohen's undoing?
No, you would never predict it, but I think that what Avenatti has done, in probably more subtle ways the Mueller investigators have done, is identify Cohen as the one that if you penetrate him, at best, you may find out things if they don't already have them. And at worst, you put Trump in a very precarious position, because if Cohen says, yes, I did certain things with the knowledge of Donald Trump, the only one that can deny that is Donald Trump, which leads to Trump having to testify or say something under oath, or it is left unanswered. And that's a very dangerous position for the president.
Right, and it seems like Donald Trump himself may realize that. My thanks to Rev Sharpton, Shelby Holliday, and Randall Eliason. Let me mention Politics Nation airs every Sunday, 8 a.m. Eastern. Up ahead, when all the evidence is in, how will we know what Bob Mueller has found? We're actually going to give you the legal map of where that hedges and why everything could hinge on, yes, Rod Rosenstein, when our special edition of The Beat continues.
I'm trying to be honest with you and tell you that I can't commit to collusion right now.
So I have to wait 2 more years for him to be out of office.
Honestly, probably 6.
The joke there is not on Donald Trump for once. It's SNL noting that people who may hope Mueller will deliver a rose and findings to end this presidency may be very disappointed. The fact is, Bob Mueller's mandate is not to look for something bad on Trump. It's to find out what happened with Russian meddling and prosecute any Americans who helped. If Trump didn't help, and if he doesn't obstruct the probe, then he'd be in the clear. When all the evidence is in, though, how will we even know what Mueller found? Well, his boss, Rod Rosenstein, has the authority to publicly release the Mueller findings, and Mueller may divide those findings into 2 separate reports. The Washington Post saying that there's a potential plan to release findings in stages, with the first report focused on the obstruction issue and a second on interference and collusion. Now, this plan could account for Rudy Giuliani's recent claim that the obstruction part of the probe will be done by September. But what is the strategy behind Mueller releasing 2 different reports in the first place? I mean, in the special probe into Bill Clinton, Ken Starr tackled all kinds of different issues, rolled them up into one giant report, and implicitly joined the drumbeat for impeachment based on allegations of obstruction.
In brutal and at times graphic detail, prosecutors lay out how the president allegedly lied and obstructed justice in both civil and criminal investigations, charging Clinton engaged in a pattern of conduct that was inconsistent with his constitutional duty to faithfully execute the laws.
Back with me is former U.S. Attorney Guy Lewis. He worked with Bob Mueller. Dan Goldman is here as well, and Maya Wiley. Guy, let me start with you. Why 2 reports?
I think it makes a lot of sense, frankly, Ari, because it allows you to sort of narrow the focus, to be more laser-like, to deal with just the evidence that relates to those allegations in particular. I mean, you've got to think, they've interviewed hundreds of people, they reviewed thousands and thousands of documents. It's probably a couple of roomfuls of material. So anything that the special counsel can do to sort of narrow that focus, I applaud him for that effort.
But what about the idea that if you release the obstruction report early and then you have to continue with your investigation, there could be more obstruction after the report, potentially?
Well, that is a worry, I think, that Bob Mueller would have. And I really do think that his team can sit down and determine up front, can we dissect this? Can we make this into a manageable presentation? Because, again, I don't like the idea of a 2,000-page report that becomes virtually impossible to read and understand. Americans do need to look at this. They need to be able to consume it and make decisions for themselves.
And Daniel, looking at the actual rules, Starr had a different mandate under a different law, which can matter a lot when you get to the fighting. These DOJ rules say it's up to Rosenstein whether he releases this. Can you see any situation where after all this, Rod Rosenstein says, no, we're just going to keep it secret?
I can't imagine that. But what is going to be very tricky is redacting the grand jury information, because anything gleaned by grand jury subpoena or grand jury testimony cannot be released, and it must remain confidential. So there's some question, even if he does release it, what is its use if we don't know much of what happened, because it all occurred in front of the grand jury?
There is a view in the politics of this, and if it's a report that Congress is going to use to decide what, if anything, to do, there's a political aspect to this. That if, when it's all said and done, the only thing is, quote unquote, potential obstruction, a lot of which occurred through the president's Twitter fingers, that American the American public and the Republicans are going to say, well, we kind of already knew that. There's nothing on collusion. Let's move on, which again seems to cut against two separate reports because it may allow Republicans at a brute level to say, well, one has nothing. Russia doesn't touch Trump, maybe other people. And the other is, Twitter obstruction.
I think you can look at it either way. I think it's actually probably a smart strategy to release two reports, primarily because the obstruction case is already pretty clear. I think to Daniel's point, so much of it has been public statements by Donald Trump himself that it doesn't have the grand jury problem, which means you can paint a pretty clear picture in that first report that Donald Trump was obstructing justice. And then the question becomes why?
Yeah, do you know why he admitted to using Russia as the reason to fire the FBI director on TV?
A lack of understanding of the law.
I actually am not convinced that there's going to be a report on collusion. I think that what may end up happening is that there will be some people indicted. Probably not the president, but that Bob Mueller, as he has to this point, will speak through an indictment, and it will be quite a lengthy indictment.
By the way, it's very 2018 that you say people will be indicted, and probably not the president.
Right.
But go on.
Exactly.
Probably not.
This is the world in which we live. It is crazy. But for that reason, in part because of the timing issues related to the midterms, they probably can finish up the obstruction investigation by the end of the summer. And so it may make sense to get that out of the way and then continue focusing on the collusion investigation.
Isn't it also possible, Maya, that, again, we speak about what we know, and everyone, I think, judiciously has emphasized as much we just don't know by the nature of this tonight. But when we talk about reports, we're focusing on that public aspect, which is what pertains to the president, because he is literally different than every other person in our constitutional system with regard to his role to execute the laws. It's also possible that the obstruction piece could involve indictments of other people around Donald Trump who helped obstruct justice, and then a report speaking to his mental state, intent, and awareness of those activities.
That's absolutely right. And also what kinds of deals you get from people you've indicted on the obstruction. So I think that what we don't know, there are lots that we don't know. And probably on the prosecutorial side, there's still so much that they must be going through just even on the Michael Cohen documents. I mean, I'm not going to let go of this one. I don't think we know. Remember that Richard Nixon ultimately was brought down not on obstruction. He was brought down because there was a smoking gun through the tapes about his direct involvement in criminal activity. Mm-hmm. I think that that's actually the real question here. We don't know the answer to, but we also don't know what we're going to find or what's going to become available to prosecutors as a result of the Michael Cohen documents.
Lightning rapid round. Year 2 of the Mueller probe, would you expect more or fewer indictments? Starting with you, Guy Lewis, briefly.
Fewer.
I think there will be fewer indictments, but more pages of indictments.
Spoken like a lawyer, predicting page counts. Maya?
I think fewer, but with greater consequence.
With greater consequence.
It's a better way of putting it.
Well, sometimes, and by that I mean most of the time, Maya puts it better than everyone else here.
Absolutely.
I'm kidding. We love all of our guests equally. We just love Maya more. Guy Lewis, Maya Wiley, Daniel Goldman, thanks for being part of our special coverage, and we will be right back. You've been watching our special coverage of Year 1 of the Mueller probe, and as we look towards Year 2, there are 3 big questions that remain. Will there be more indictments in Year 2 than Year 1, as we were discussing? Will Donald Trump do a presidential grand jury interview, as Bill Clinton did, but as his lawyers continue to fight? And number 3, and finally, as we were reporting, will there be a report or reports that the public sees about what Bob Mueller has learned through this probe? That's what we have our eye on.
Hey, it's Chris Hayes from MSNBC. You know, every day I come to the office and we make a television show. And every day I think to myself, there's so much more I want to talk about. And so this is our podcast. It's called Why Is This Happening? And the whole idea behind it is to get to the root of the things that we see play out every day. They're driven by big ideas. Each week, I sit down with a person uniquely suited to explain why this is happening.
New episodes of Why Is This Happening? Every Tuesday. Listen for free wherever you get your podcasts.